Today we're talking about the Canon R5 C, a camera that I was totally wrong about until I got to test it out. So yes, one that took me by surprise. Before actually trying out the R5 C, I made the mistake, probably like a lot of people, thinking this was simply an R5 with a fan, which is certainly not the case. But as someone who rarely overheats my R5, this is probably why it took me so long to try it out. This camera really is so much more than that. What you're actually getting is an epically powerful cine camera while still having the superb R5 quality for stills. This camera actually takes a really unique approach to the word hybrid, and it was really refreshing to use, making it probably one of the only true hybrids out there when you need that high quality cinema camera and options, as well as still getting the highest quality stills. Of course, there's so many different options that do a decent job at both, but typically you will be able to find compromises somewhere. Quick disclaimer, this camera is actually a loan from Canon Australia, but they have no bearings on this video, so it's not sponsored in any way. But I have been lucky enough to test it out for over a month now though, so a good period to see how it performs and how it stacks up to my regular R5. So why is the R5 C so different? Well, honestly, this camera's biggest strength is something that I've heard a few people complain about, and that's the time it takes to switch between photo and video. Bear with me for a sec. Now, this was drastically improved with firmware updates, but yes, it does still take a few seconds to load when switching between the two. Why? Because this camera actually feels like two different cameras in one. You're getting completely different menus for both photo and video. Switch it over to video and you'll find a complete cine interface with so many extra inclusions compared to the R5 and, well, most regular mirrorless cameras. Back to photo, you'll find the same regular photo menu exactly like the R5. So here lies this camera's true strength to me. Having a menu that is totally dedicated to video is actually quite unique. If you have used a cinema-based camera before, you'll know the menu setup and options is usually very different to what you find in the typical mirrorless camera, which is definitely more a menu that has some video options jammed into more of a photography-based menu. Of course, this can be fine for a lot of things, but it is still quite limited compared to a cinema camera. So what are these settings that are so important to video? Well, we actually have a lot. You get way better monitoring, things like vector scopes, false color, even a simple one like having shutter angle is really nice, and also a lot of video specific button options. Even down to the AF system, I really like this face only feature, which stays on that focus even if you leave the frame until someone comes back. Having so many different audio options, you have 4 tracks and you can change all the levels, and having a bunch of extra codec options you just don't get in the R5. Honestly, all these features combined just improve the overall video experience, and if you haven't used a cinema camera before, I definitely recommend trying to get your hands on one just to try it out for this reason. So I guess we should quickly touch on the physical appearance, because comparing to the R5, there's one obvious thing that we should talk about, which of course is the fan. Ergonomics, you'll still find this pretty similar to the R5 of course, and actually despite it being way chunkier with the fan, it doesn't actually feel that much heavier. So in the world of cinema cameras, it is still super lightweight and really portable to most out there. The fan does work great, and yes, you can hear it if you get close enough, but for me it hasn't once been an issue for audio. I've had the R5 since it came out, and for me, how I use that camera, I rarely overheat it. Now, if I stumble my words enough on these YouTube videos, the record time creeps up and I can get it pretty close. So just not having to worry about that, I'm on the R5 C now, is a really nice thing. The only downside to the fan is how it's going to affect your battery life, which I'll get to later in the video, but it would have been nice to have a few more options here to control that. Moving on to codec and color options in the menu, and firstly, you will also find 2 additional crop modes. You also get the choice between NTSC, PAL, and DCI frequencies, codecs for H.264 and 265, internal and external RAW, and the addition of XF AVC in both intra-frame and long GOP. So I have been using XF AVC for the entire time, and for some reason, I actually prefer this to the codecs you're getting on the R5. I can find I can push the color grading a little bit more more with this codec, but it could also be down to my next point, which is the dynamic range. I haven't tested this extensively compared to the R5, but I have seen from doing my research that you do get a much better dynamic range than the R5 for video, which is really nice. You also have built-in noise reduction that you can turn on and off to different levels. For white balance, I also really liked using the touch scene evaluation, simply dropping in my gray card, then pressing the button here to evaluate the scene. You also have 2 custom modes like this that you can set when filming in the same lighting situations. For all these reasons, even when I'm filming my talking to camera parts like this, it just makes it so much easier to really nail exposure, white balance, your audio, things like that, just improving the video experience, and things I'm definitely going to miss going back to my regular R5. Now, if you switch this thing over to photo, you'll be very at home here if you've used the R5 before or any other of Canon's mirrorless cameras. Again, you'll get the exact same menu as the R5, and you really can't fault the R5 C when it comes to stills. I would say for me personally, as someone who does do a lot of video work, but I still see myself as a photographer at heart, I can't say I loved the overall experience when using this camera purely for stills. As I said, you certainly can't fault the quality and performance, and I didn't find it even overly heavy compared to the R5 despite having the fan. But it is just way more obvious, and especially when I was out in public walking around taking photos, it definitely didn't feel subtle. This will totally depend on what type of photography you're doing, as I imagine someone in a studio isn't going to be as worried about the size as much, or if you're quite used to a much larger cinema camera, this will actually feel quite liberating. So this might go without saying, but this is why this camera is definitely more targeted to your video professionals who still want to be able to take the occasional stills, but have the highest quality when they're doing it, and probably not so much the other way around, a photographer that wants high quality video. So although the R5 C is pretty hard to fault for video alone, there is a few things worth mentioning. Firstly, looking at batteries, we have the same LP batteries as the R5. So when you add the fan to this camera, it really does overpower these batteries quite quickly. Thankfully, one of the biggest firmware updates to this added a power saving mode, which actually really improves battery life and record times. Just be aware that this isn't for all video modes, but thankfully for all the video modes I was using, it did really improve the record times. There is plenty of options to rig this thing up with external power if you need it. Personally, with the firmware update and this power saving mode, I get more than enough record time. It hasn't been an issue, but think about what external power you might need if you're planning to use this thing for long periods of time. I did quickly want to discuss that this camera has no inbuilt image stabilization. Now, this will depend. If you're coming from a mirrorless camera that has IBIS, you may miss it coming to the R5 C. But if you're coming from a lot of cinema cameras which typically don't have IBIS, then you're probably used to using a proper rig when you need real stabilization anyway. Now, as this is quite a lightweight and portable cinema camera, and a lot of people will probably use it in a more run and gun setting, for me it would have been nice to have it included. You do still have digital IS, which largely does a good job when you need it, particularly when it's paired with a stabilized lens. Remember, this will just crop in a little bit. So this camera to me really is the ultimate true hybrid. You're getting those amazing quality stills direct from the R5, then you're getting a complete Cine interface thrown in with so many options and features. Although it's not perfect, it is incredibly hard to fault this camera, and I think Canon have done a really great job. So will I be buying one, and should you? Well, for me, I haven't really considered it, and especially for all my YouTube videos, especially stuff like this, it has so many nice inclusions which I just don't get in the R5. But I am trying to be quite a bit more mindful of having less gear, especially traveling and carrying less gear. So I don't think I would ever take both the R5 C and the R5 away traveling. Because I take so many stills, I think personally for me, the R5 is just a little bit better suited, although I am definitely going to miss some of the features that this camera offers. So for now, a reluctant goodbye to the R5 C, one I hope I can revisit someday, and definitely a super exciting one for the future of hybrid cameras. Thanks so much for watching. Keep on creating and keep on growing, my friends. I will catch you in the next one. Bye for now.